the previous video, we've seen how we could create models, how we can create tables onto the Django databases, and now we're going to see how we can view these models on a web page. So these are our two models, the airport and the flight, which as we said are related to each other. So the flight have a foreign key of the airport, and so the same is for origin and destination. And now we can begin to design a web application around this idea. That again, I go to urls.py of that flights application, and add a path to my URL patterns, and let's have a default path that would display for us a list of all the flights. And so we need to have a function, and in order to do that, we're going to go to views.index. So we'll be creating that function, that index function, in a minute, and let's give it a name of index and save it. And now we're going to views.py and create that function, that index function, which is going to get a request, as we always do in views.py. And what I would like to do is just display a list of all the flights. So I might need from .models to import that flight and that airport models. So I'm going to be importing flight and airport. Okay. And I just want a list of all the flights, as I said. So now what I'm going to be doing is returning a rendered HTML page. So render upon a request, and so let's render a page called flights/index.html, and let's give this HTML page access to a variable called flights. And what is that variable going to be equal to? It's going to be equal to flight. So flight is the name of our model, dot objects dot all, to get me all of the flights that I would like to put right here. And so now what I need to do is actually create those individual templates. So inside of flights, I'm going to be creating a new folder called templates, inside of which I'm going to be creating another folder called flights, and I'm going to be creating first the layout HTML page. So that's the basic one, which we'll be inheriting from. And so this page is going to contain the basic structure of our web page. So I'm going to add a block here, so I can just add it inside of the other HTML page. So that's the section where I'll be adding those flights. And let's go ahead and give it let's say a heading of flights. And so this is the default page. So this is the default layout for my page. And now let's go ahead and create index.html, which is going to extend that layout page. So layout.html, which is inside of my flights folder. And now inside of the block body, I'm going to somehow add these flights. So in order to do that, let's first create an unordered list, and inside of that unordered list, I'm going to be looping over that flights variable that we've added. So for every flight inside of our flights variable, and so that flights first is the one right here. So that's the variable flights, which is a list of all the flights objects that we have. And now we're going to loop over each flight inside of those flights list that I acquired by running flight.objects.all. And this is my way of using Django's the things that Django has given me access to get the flights that are stored in Django's database. So let's just type in here that every time I go over a flight, I'm going to be creating a list item. So looping over these flights and printing the flight in each loop. So inside of a list item, as I said. And so let's first add, let's say its ID, so flight number, let's say 1 or 2. And in order to add the ID, I need inside of double curly braces to add flight, that variable flight that I created, which is an item of that list. And we've seen earlier that we can access properties of those flight objects, those model objects that are inside of my database. And so I can do that, and also in Django HTML. So I'm going to access that ID by typing in flight.id. So flight number 1, let's say, so that's the ID, and I'd like to see where it's headed, and so where it's going, from where it's headed and where it's going. So flight dot origin to, and going to add to flight dot destination. And so in that way it would be clear, and I've put all the information I need to know about that flight, and its ID, its origin, its destination, its duration, and so we can add a duration. So let's say inside of parentheses add the flight duration, so flight dot duration, and a column, or let's say without a column, just this, in order for them to understand that these are in minutes. So that's going to happen for each of my flights. So now I'm going to be saving that and going to views.py and saving it. And now let's go ahead and open the command line and run python manage.py run server, and click on enter. And as soon as it finishes, let's just copy the link and open it in our web browser. So let's go ahead and paste it here, and I can see that page is not found because we haven't entered the application. So let's go to flights, to the flights application, and so now you can see that I have exactly one flight, and this is its ID 1 from New York to London, and its duration is 415 minutes. It's taking data from my database and now displaying it inside of this template. And if I were to add these flights, it would also update on this page as well. So you can go ahead and visualize that by adding any flight using Python shell. And so let's go ahead and stop running our server and type in python manage.py and followed by shell in order to access our shell. And let's say that I would like to add a flight from Dubai to Paris, for example. Well, how do I get the input for Dubai and Paris? And so it turns out if I want to get Dubai, I can say Dubai. Well, first of all, we need to import flights from flights.models, import star, and now then let's create our variable Dubai, which is the airport I would like to get. And so first in order to visualize the airports that I have, let's say we need to type in first airport dot objects dot all, and the airport is capitalized. And if you go ahead and enter that, we are returned with a query set with all the airports that I have. So I have New York, Dubai, and Milan. But I just want to get one of these airports. One for the destination and one for the origin. And so another thing I can do is filter my airports list. Just to get all the airports, but just some of them. So I can say something like airport dot objects dot filter and not all. And I'm going to be filtering those airport objects according to some category. So maybe I want my airports to be from the city New York. So New York. And if I go ahead, you can see we are returned with this query set which contains only that airport. Don't mind these. So we got that airport which has city New York, and that's going to as I said, give me only one element of that query set. And so that filter lets me constrain the results that come back, not get me all the airports, but only get me airports whose city is New York, for example. And it's only giving me back one. So I could say dot filter city New York, or let's say the code, I could just add the code if I don't want to add the city. And a simplified of doing the same thing, if you know you're only getting one object, so one result back, I can say something like airport dot objects dot get, and city is New York. And now if I hit enter, you can see that I don't have a query set anymore, but I have only an object which is on that airport, which is actually from with the code JFK, New York with the code JFK. But it would throw me an error if there were more than one object, which because as we said, the get only gives us one. Let's go ahead and save that JFK airport inside of a variable in order to use it. So airport.objects.get, and let's add the code that's shorter. So JFK and we are returned with an error because the string wasn't completed. So let's just go ahead and refix that problem. Airport.objects.get code equals to JFK, close that and enter, and another error, sorry for that, copy that, so JFK equals to, okay, so now everything seems to be good, and of course I want to save that, so I want to save that Dubai one, so airport dot objects dot get the code, which is DXB, and enter. Now I saved my airports inside of these variables, and now I'm going to add my new flight. So in order to add that flight, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create that variable flight equals to flight object origin, let's say is Dubai, so DXB, destination is JFK, and let's say the duration is equals to 500 minutes. So now I hit enter, and I go ahead and save my flights in order to save it to my database. So now I've saved that flight, and now my database has two flights. One flight that's going from New York to London, and one flight that's going from Dubai to New York. And so now if I go ahead and refresh my page, so let's go ahead and refresh. First of all, we need to exit that shell and rerun our server. So python manage.py run server, and open our web page, refresh it. You can see that we have that newly added flight to our web page. So that's the flight we already had, and that's the new flight that we've added using Python shell.